What happens when a battle-hardened soldier risks everything to protect a stranger, only to discover she's been living the biggest lie of all? Tonight, I'm bringing you a story about deception, sacrifice, and the kind of love that changes lives forever. Stay with me until the very end and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this incredible journey has traveled across the world. The screams cut through the midnight air like broken glass. Daniel Cross's combat boots hit the pavement hard as he sprinted across the empty college quad, his military training kicking in before his mind could fully process what he'd heard. 20 years in the Army had taught him to recognize the difference between playful college noise and genuine terror. This was terror. He rounded the corner of the Humanities building and froze. Under the harsh glare of a security light, 3 young men in designer jackets had cornered a girl against the brick wall. Her coffee shop apron was torn, her dark hair disheveled, and her eyes, those striking green eyes, blazed with defiance, even as her hands shook. "Please just leave me alone," she whispered, her voice carrying an accent that Daniel couldn't quite place. Too refined for the working-class neighborhood where the coffee shop sat. The tallest of the 3, a blonde kid who reeked of privilege and entitlement, grabbed her wrist. "Come on, Sophia. Stop playing hard to get. You know you want to hang out with us. We've got money connections. What's some barista gonna do? Make us lattes?" His friends laughed, the sound echoing off the empty buildings like hyenas circling wounded prey. Daniel's jaw clenched. He'd seen this same scene play out in a dozen different countries, in a dozen different languages. Predators were predators, whether they wore military fatigues or polo shirts. "Hey!" His voice boomed across the courtyard, with the authority of someone who'd commanded troops under fire. All 4 heads snapped toward him. "Back away from the girl. Now!" The blonde kid, probably some senator's son or corporate heir, sneered. "Mind your own business, old man. This doesn't concern you." Old man. Daniel almost smiled. At 38, he was probably only 15 years older than these punks, but those 15 years included 2 tours in Afghanistan, countless missions in hostile territory, and the kind of experiences that aged a man's soul far beyond his physical years. "I'm making it my business," Daniel said, stepping into the light. His security guard uniform might not look like much, but his bearing shoulders, back eyes sharp, every muscle coiled and ready, spoke of someone who'd faced down far worse than entitled college boys. "The lady asked you to leave her alone, so leave." "Do you know who I am?" the blonde kid snarled, releasing the girl's wrist but stepping closer to Daniel. "My father owns half this city. I could have you fired with 1 phone call." Daniel's expression didn't change. "Do you know who I am?" he asked quietly. "I'm someone who's been shot at by people a hell of a lot scarier than you. And right now, I'm someone who's running out of patience." The tension crackled between them like electricity before a storm. Daniel could see the calculations running behind the kid's eyes, weighing his family's influence against the very real possibility that this security guard might not be as easy to intimidate as most people. The girl Sophia, they'd called her, watched the standoff with wide eyes, pressing herself against the wall as if she could disappear into the bricks. "This isn't over," the blonde finally said, but he was already backing away, his courage deflating like a punctured balloon. "Come on, guys. This place smells like failure anyway." They slouched away into the darkness, their expensive sneakers scuffing against the concrete, muttering threats they'd never have the spine to carry out. Daniel waited until their voices faded completely before turning to the girl. She was still pressed against the wall, her chest rising and falling rapidly, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice gentler now, the commanding edge replaced by genuine concern. She shook her head quickly, perhaps too quickly. No, I'm fine, thank you, She stopped studying his face in the security light. You didn't have to do that. Yeah, I did. Daniel pulled out a small flashlight and did a quick sweep of the area, checking for any signs that the three might be lingering nearby. Old habits. Are you sure you're okay? They didn't hurt me, she said firmly. Not physically. They're just persistent. Daniel nodded, clicking off the flashlight. Persistent. That's one word for it. He studied her face, noting the way she held herself spine straight, despite the fear, chin up, despite the tears threatening to spill. There was something about her posture, her diction, that didn't quite match the torn coffee shop apron and worn sneakers. I'm Daniel, by the way. Daniel Cross. Sophia, she said, then hesitated as if she'd surprised herself by giving her real name. Sophia Lane. I work at the coffee shop on 5th Street. I know. Daniel had noticed her before, during his night rounds, always staying late, always with textbooks spread across one of the corner tables. Pre-med, business, she said, then added quickly. With a minor in literature, I'm a junior. Something flickered across her face when she said, it'd gone too fast for Daniel to interpret. He'd interrogated enough people to know when someone was choosing their words carefully, but right now his focus was on making sure she got home safely. Where do you live? He asked. I'll walk you back. Oh, you don't have to. Sophia. The use of her name made her look up at him. Those guys know where you work. They probably know your schedule. They're not going to just forget about this because some security guard scared them off. At least not tonight. She bit her lower lip, a gesture that made her look younger than her 21 years. The Meridian Apartments. It's about 6 blocks from here. Daniel knew the building. Decent enough place, though not cheap. Most of the students who lived there came from families with money. But Sophia worked at a coffee shop, stayed up late studying with textbooks that looked secondhand, and wore clothes that had seen better days. Scholarship kid, probably. He'd seen plenty of them during his 3 years working campus security, kids trying to bridge 2 worlds, never quite fitting into either one. Come on, he said, gesturing toward the main campus pathway. I'll walk you home. They walked in comfortable silence for the first few minutes, their footsteps echoing off the empty buildings. Daniel kept his senses alert, watching the shadows, listening for the sound of following footsteps, noting which windows had lights on and which dorms still had students moving around. The campus was never completely empty, but this time of night it was close. How long have you been doing security here? Sophia asked finally. About 3 years. Daniel replied. Since I got out of the army. Afghanistan. He glanced at her, surprised. Most people didn't ask directly. 2 tours. You. My. She caught herself. I had a friend who served. He talked about it sometimes. Another careful word choice. Daniel filed it away with the growing list of small inconsistencies he'd noticed about Sophia Lane. It's different, she said after a moment. Being back in the civilian world, I mean. My friend said it was like learning to speak a new language, except everyone expected you to already be fluent. Daniel stopped walking. That's actually a pretty accurate way to put it. He studied her face in the glow of the streetlight they'd just passed under. Your friend sounds like he understood it better than most people do. He was smart, Sophia said softly. Is smart. I mean, he's still... Anyway. She started walking again, faster this time, as if she was trying to outrun her own words. Daniel caught up easily, his longer strides matching her pace without effort. What about you? What's your story? My story. Yeah, Small-town girl comes to the big city for college, local kid on scholarship, international student trying to make it in America. Sophia's laugh sounded forced. Nothing that interesting. Just trying to figure out who I want to be, you know. Sometimes that means stepping away from who people expect you to be. They'd reached the entrance to the Meridian Apartments. The building was nicer than Daniel had remembered, gleaming glass doors, a doorman, who nodded politely as they approached, marble floors visible through the entrance. Definitely not cheap. "Thank you," Sophia said, turning to face him. "For tonight, I mean. I know you were just doing your job, but—" "I wasn't doing my job," Daniel interrupted. "My job is to patrol the campus and file incident reports. What happened back there? That was just being human." She smiled, then the first real smile he'd seen from her all night. It transformed her entire face, making her look less like a frightened girl and more like, well, like someone who belonged in a building this expensive. "Still," she said, "thank you. I won't forget it." Daniel watched her disappear through the glass doors, noting how the doorman's demeanor shifted subtly as she approached not quite a bow, but something close to deference. Interesting. He was halfway back to campus when his phone buzzed. A text from his daughter Allison had. "I know it's late, but can you call me? Having trouble with my calc homework, and I have an exam tomorrow." Daniel smiled and hit the call button. His 18-year-old daughter was a freshman at State, not prestigious enough for the Sterling family trust funds, but affordable enough for a single dad's salary and his GI Bill benefits. "Hey, sweetheart," he said when she picked up. "Calculus giving you trouble again?" "Everything's giving me trouble," Allison said, and he could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "I swear, Dad, sometimes I feel like I'm the only person here who doesn't already know everything. Like everyone else got some kind of manual for college life, and I'm just making it up as I go along." Daniel thought about Sophia's words, stepping away from who people expect you to be, and felt a familiar ache in his chest. "You know what I learned in the Army," he said. "The people who look like they have it all figured out. Usually, they're just better at pretending. The ones who admit they're struggling, those are the ones who actually figure it out in the end. Is that supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to remind you that you're tougher than you think you are. You're Sarah Cross's daughter. You've got more grit in your pinky finger than most people have in their entire body." Allison was quiet for a moment. "Mom would have been better at helping with the calculus." "Yeah," Daniel said softly. "She would have. But she's not here, so you're stuck with me. And I may not remember derivatives, but I remember how to break down a problem into manageable pieces. So talk to me. What specifically is confusing you?" They spent the next hour working through her homework. Daniel's military problem-solving approach translating surprisingly well to mathematical concepts. By the time they hung up, Allison sounded more confident, and Daniel felt like he'd actually been useful for something other than scaring off entitled bullies. But as he finished his patrol and headed home to his small apartment off campus, he couldn't stop thinking about Sophia Lane. The contradictions, the careful word choices, the way the doorman had looked at her. Something didn't add up. Not that it was any of his business. He'd done what any decent person would do, stepped in when someone needed help. That was it. Tomorrow he'd go back to his regular rounds. She'd go back to her coffee shop job and her business classes, and their paths probably wouldn't cross again. Except they did. The next evening, Daniel was walking his usual route when he heard a commotion from the direction of the coffee shop on 5th Street. Not screams, this time laughter. The kind of cruel laughter that made his skin crawl. He quickened his pace and found them again. The same 3 from the night before, but this time they'd brought friends. 6 young men now surrounded the coffee shop's outdoor seating area, where Sophia sat alone at a corner table, her textbook spread around her, her laptop open. "Come on, Sophia," the blonde ringleader was saying. "We're offering you a chance to hang out with your betters. Don't you want to improve your social standing?" "I'm working," Sophia said firmly, not looking up from her screen. "And this is private property. You need to leave." "Private property?" One of the new additions to their group laughed. "Honey, my family owns the building this coffee shop rents from, so technically you're sitting on my property." Daniel was close enough now to see Sophia's hands trembling slightly as she typed. Close enough to see the barista inside a kid who couldn't be more than 19 watching nervously through the window, but clearly too intimidated to intervene. "Besides," another voice chimed in, "what's a scholarship girl like you gonna do? Call campus security? We know all those guys. They work for the same companies our dads own." That did it. Daniel stepped out of the shadows. "Gentlemen," he said conversationally, and all 6 heads turned toward him. "We meet again." The blonde kid's face went pale. "You again. I told you. You told me a lot of things last night," Daniel interrupted. "Most of them were bullshit then, and they're bullshit now. The difference is, tonight you brought backup." He looked around the group, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. 6 against 1. Very brave. 6 against 1 what? One of the new kids asked, clearly not understanding the dynamics at play. "Tyler," the blonde said nervously, "maybe we should just what?" Tyler stepped forward, all swagger and false confidence. "I'm not afraid of some wannabe cop." Daniel smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Tyler, is it? Let me guess, lacrosse player, business major. Daddy's got a corner office downtown." Tyler's chest puffed out. "That's right. And when I graduate, I'm going to be running companies while you're still playing security guard." "Maybe," Daniel said. "But right now you're harassing a young woman who's trying to study, and that's a problem." "For who?" "For you." Daniel's voice dropped to the tone he'd used to give orders in combat zones. "Because I'm going to explain something to you once and only once. This woman," he gestured toward Sophia, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes, "has the right to sit here, drink her coffee, and do her homework without being bothered by you or anyone else. And if you can't understand that basic concept of human decency, I'm going to help you understand it." "Are you threatening us?" Tyler demanded. "I'm educating you," Daniel replied. "There's a difference. But if you're too stupid to learn, then yeah, we might have a problem." The tension stretched taut between them. Daniel could see Tyler weighing his options back down and look weak in front of his friends, or push forward and risk finding out exactly how serious the ex-soldier was. Sophia stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the concrete. "Please," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the space. "Just go. I don't want any trouble." "See?" Tyler turned back to Daniel triumphantly. "She doesn't want trouble. So why don't you mind your own business and let us handle this?" "Because," Daniel said quietly, "when a woman says she doesn't want trouble, it usually means she's already being troubled. By you." That's when Tyler made his mistake. He reached out and grabbed Sophia's wrist, the same move his friend had tried the night before. Daniel moved. 20 years of military training condensed into 3 seconds of controlled violence. One moment Tyler was smirking and holding Sophia's wrist. The next, he was on his knees, his arm twisted behind his back, at an angle that suggested any sudden movement would result in a dislocated shoulder. "Here's that education I mentioned," Daniel said conversationally, not even breathing hard. "Lesson 1, when a woman says no, that's the end of the conversation. Lesson 2, when someone asks you to leave them alone, you leave them alone. Lesson 3: putting your hands on someone without permission is assault, and I'm legally authorized to detain you until the police arrive. Tyler's face was bright red, whether from pain or embarrassment. Daniel couldn't tell and didn't care. "Do you understand these lessons?" Daniel asked. "Yes," Tyler gasped. "Yes, I understand." "Good." Daniel released him and stepped back. Tyler scrambled to his feet, cradling his arm. "Now all of you are going to leave. You're going to stay away from this coffee shop, away from this young woman, and away from any other students who don't want your attention. Because if I see you harassing anyone else, we're going to have a much longer conversation about respect and consequences." The 6 of them left without another word, Tyler's friends practically carrying him as they disappeared into the night. Daniel turned back to Sophia, who had sunk back into her chair and was staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "You didn't have to do that." "We've been through this," Daniel said, pulling out the chair across from her and sitting down. "Yeah, I did." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, studying his face in the glow of the coffee shop's outdoor lights. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why what? Why do you keep helping me? You don't know me. I'm just some college kid working at a coffee shop. I'm nobody special." Daniel leaned back in his chair, considering the question. "You know what I learned in Afghanistan," he said finally. "The locals there, they had this saying, a person's worth isn't measured by what they have, but by how they treat those who have nothing. You see those guys?" He nodded toward the direction the 6 had fled. "They judge people by what they can get from them. Money, status, connections. But you were sitting here alone, studying, not bothering anyone. And when they started causing trouble, you asked them to leave politely. You didn't threaten them or try to use connections or play games. You just asked to be left alone." He paused, watching her face. "That tells me more about your character than any family name or bank account balance ever could." Something flickered across Sophia's expression, surprise maybe, or something deeper. "Guilt, besides," Daniel continued. "I've got a daughter about your age. She's at state trying to figure out her own path, and I keep thinking if she was sitting somewhere alone being harassed by guys like that, I'd want someone to step in, someone to have her back." "What's her name?" Sophia asked quietly. "Allison. She's everything good about her mother and nothing bad about me." Daniel smiled. "Smart as hell, stubborn as a mule, and determined to save the world one calculus problem at a time." Sophia laughed, and again Daniel was struck by how the sound transformed her. "She sounds wonderful." "She is." He glanced at her textbooks spread across the table. "What about you, business major, you said?" "Yes, with a literature minor." She touched one of the books, Advanced Corporate Finance, then pulled her hand back quickly. "I like the storytelling aspect of literature, but business is more practical." "Practical how?" Sophia hesitated, choosing her words carefully again. "It opens doors, creates opportunities. My family, they have certain expectations." "What kind of expectations?" "The kind that come with—" She stopped herself, shaking her head. "I'm sorry, I'm not used to talking about this with strangers." "We're not strangers anymore," Daniel pointed out. "I've saved your ass twice now. That makes us at least acquaintances." That drew another laugh from her, more genuine this time. "Okay, acquaintances then. But still, family stuff is complicated." "All family stuff is complicated," Daniel said. "The question is whether it's complicated because people care about each other, or complicated because people care about other things more than each other." Sophia went very still. That's, that's a very perceptive way to put it. Which category does your family fall into? She was quiet for so long that Daniel thought she wasn't going to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know anymore. The honesty in those 4 words hit Daniel like a punch to the chest. He'd heard that same lost tone in his own voice during the darkest days after Sarah's death, when Allison was still in high school, and he was trying to figure out how to be both father and mother to a grieving teenager. You know what helped me when I was trying to figure that out, he said. What? Finding people who cared about me for me, not for what I could do for them or what I represented to them. Just me. The guy who made terrible jokes and burned breakfast and had no idea how to braid hair, but tried anyway. Sophia's eyes filled with tears, though she blinked them back quickly. That sounds nice. It is nice. It's also rare as hell, which is why you hold on to it when you find it. They sat in comfortable silence after that, Sophia returning to her studying, while Daniel kept a casual watch on their surroundings. The barista inside had relaxed once the 6 troublemakers left, and normal life had resumed around them. A few students walking by cars passing on the street, the ordinary rhythm of a college town evening. Daniel found himself studying Sophia as she worked. There was something almost choreographed about the way she moved, every gesture precise, controlled, as if she'd been taught to be conscious of how she appeared to others. Her handwriting was perfect, her notes organized in a way that suggested years of expensive tutoring. Even the way she held her pen spoke of someone who'd been trained in proper etiquette. But then she'd bite her lip when concentrating, or tuck her hair behind her ear with unconscious grace, and she'd look like any other college student trying to make sense of complex material. Can I ask you something? She said, suddenly looking up from her textbook. Shoot. Earlier when you stopped Tyler, you moved like you'd done it before. Daniel nodded. I have done it before. In Afghanistan, among other places. He leaned forward slightly. Why do you ask? I've been thinking about what you said, about finding people who care about you for who you are, and I was wondering. She hesitated, then pushed forward. Do you think it's possible for someone to care about you if they don't really know who you are? The question caught Daniel off guard. What do you mean? I mean, what if someone presented themselves as one thing, but they were actually something else? Not lying exactly, but not telling the whole truth either. Could genuine caring exist in that situation? Daniel considered the question carefully. I think, he said finally, that there's a difference between someone who's hiding parts of themselves because they're ashamed or scared, and someone who's hiding parts of themselves because they're trying to manipulate others. How can you tell the difference? Intent, Daniel said immediately. And consistency. Someone who's hiding because they're scared will still show you their real character in how they treat other people. Someone who's hiding because they're manipulative will have inconsistencies. They'll be kind to people who can help them, and cruel to people who can't. Sophia nodded slowly, as if filing away his words for later consideration. Why do you ask? Daniel said. Just curious. She closed her textbook and started gathering her things. I should probably get going. Early class tomorrow. Daniel stood as well. I'll walk you back. You don't have to, Sophia. He gave her a look that was part amusement, part exasperation. We've established that those guys know where you work and where you live. Until they find some other victim to focus on, you're not walking alone at night. End of discussion. She looked like she wanted to argue, then seemed to think better of it. Okay. Thank you. They walked back toward the Meridian apartments in companionable silence, but Daniel could sense Sophia's mind working overtime. She kept glancing at him as if she wanted to say something, then looking away when he caught her eye. "Daniel," she said, as they reached the building entrance. "Yeah. What you said about intent and consistency, that works both ways, doesn't it? I mean, if someone cares about you, despite not knowing everything about your situation, that says something about their character, too." Daniel studied her face in the glow of the building's lights. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think it does." She smiled, then soft and genuine. "Good night, Daniel." "Good night, Sophia." As he watched her disappear through the glass doors again, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that their conversation had been about farce than academic curiosity. Sophia Lane was hiding something, that much was obvious. The question was whether she was hiding it out of fear or manipulation. His gut said fear. Everything about her responses, her body language, her genuine reactions to his help suggested someone who was scared and alone, not someone playing games. But his training said to trust but verify. Either way, he thought as he headed back to campus for the rest of his patrol, he'd keep an eye on her. Those rich boys weren't going to give up easily, and Sophia, whatever her real story, didn't deserve to be terrorized, because some entitled assholes couldn't take no for an answer. What Daniel didn't know was that 6 blocks away in the penthouse apartment she actually called home, Sophia Lane was staring out her floor-to-ceiling windows at the city lights below, thinking about intent and consistency, and what it meant to be cared for without conditions. And what he definitely didn't know was that her real name wasn't Sophia Lane at all. It was Cassandra Sterling, daughter of billionaire CEO Edward Sterling, heir to a corporate empire worth more than most small countries' GDP. And for the first time in her privileged, isolated, carefully controlled life, someone had looked at her and seen not a business opportunity or a networking contact or a stepping stone to greater wealth and influence, but simply a person worth protecting. The question that kept her awake that night wasn't whether she could trust Daniel Cross. It was whether she deserved to. The next 3 weeks fell into a rhythm that surprised them both. Daniel would find reasons to patrol near the coffee shop during Sophia's study hours, always casual, always professional, but always there. And Sophia would glance up from her textbooks whenever she heard his footsteps on the sidewalk, a small smile playing at her lips, before she caught herself and looked back down. It started small. Daniel bringing her a cup of soup when she was sniffling through what she claimed was just allergies, but looked suspiciously like a cold. Sophia saving him a cookie from the coffee shop's day-old pastry bin because she'd noticed he never ate during his shifts. Conversations that began about campus security and somehow wandered into discussions about books, life, and the strange loneliness of being surrounded by people who didn't really see you. "You're different than I expected," Sophia said one evening, looking up from her advanced corporate finance textbook. They'd established an unspoken agreement she studied he kept watch, and they talked in the comfortable spaces between her assignments. "Different how?" Daniel asked, settling into what had become his usual chair across from her. "When I first saw you that night, you looked so intimidating. Military-bearing command presence ready to take on 6 guys without breaking a sweat." She gestured vaguely at his relaxed posture. "But sitting here, you're just easy to talk to. Like you actually listen when people speak." "Most people don't get listened to enough," Daniel said. "Especially people your age. Everyone's always telling you what to do, what to think, who to be. Not many people just ask what you want." Sophia's pen stilled on her notebook. "And what do you think I want?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with more weight than casual conversation should carry. Daniel studied her face, noting the way she held herself perfectly still, as if his answer might change everything. "I think you want to matter for who you are, not what you represent," he said finally. "I think you want someone to see past whatever expectations everyone else has placed on you and recognize the person underneath. And I think you're scared that if people really knew that person, they might not think she's worth knowing." Tears gathered in Sophia's eyes, though she blinked them back quickly. That's remarkably insightful for a security guard." "I've had a lot of practice reading people," Daniel said gently. "Comes with the territory when you're responsible for other people's safety. You learn to see what they're not saying as much as what they are." "And what am I not saying?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, watching her face. "You're not saying that you're lonely. You're not saying that the people in your life care more about what you can do for them than who you are as a person. And you're not saying that sitting here with me, pretending to be just another college student, is the most honest you've felt in years." The accuracy of his assessment hit Sophia like a physical blow. She set down her pen with hands that trembled slightly. "How do you do that?" she whispered. "Do what? See right through people like that. It's like you have X-ray vision for souls." Daniel laughed, but not unkindly. "It's not that complicated. Most people are desperate to be understood, but they're also terrified of being truly seen. So they drop little hints, test the waters to see if anyone's paying attention. You've been dropping hints since the night we met." "What kind of hints?" "The way you talk about your family, like they're strangers you're obligated to please. The way you correct yourself when you start to mention personal details. The way you hold yourself like you're constantly being evaluated." He leaned forward slightly. "The way you live in an expensive apartment, but wear clothes that have seen better days, like you're trying to hide how much money you actually have access to." Sophia's face went pale. "I never said I had money." "You never said you didn't either. And honey, nobody lives in the Meridian on a barista's salary, scholarship or no scholarship." The endearment slipped out before Daniel realized he'd said it, and they both went still. In 3 weeks of conversations, he'd never used anything but her name. The casual intimacy of honey suggested a closeness that neither of them had acknowledged out loud. "I should go," Sophia said, suddenly gathering her books with jerky, nervous movements. "Sophia, wait. No, this was a mistake. I should never have—" She stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her chair. "Thank you for everything you've done, but I think it's better if we don't see each other anymore." Daniel stood too, his soldier's reflexes keeping pace with her sudden urgency. "What just happened here 5 minutes ago? We were having a normal conversation." "Normal?" Sophia's laugh was bitter. "Nothing about this is normal, Daniel. You're a security guard. I'm a student. We don't have anything in common." "Bullshit." The word came out sharper than Daniel intended, but he was tired of watching her run from whatever was scaring her. "We've been talking for 3 weeks. I know you prefer tea to coffee, but you drink coffee because it keeps you awake longer. I know you bite your lip when you're thinking, and you doodle roses in the margins of your notes when you're bored. I know you light up when you talk about books, but you get this sad, distant look when anyone mentions family. I know you're fluent in at least 2 languages because you curse in what sounds like French when your laptop freezes." Sophia had gone completely still during his recitation, staring at him with wide eyes. "So don't tell me we don't have anything in common." Daniel continued, his voice gentler now. "And don't tell me this isn't normal. Maybe it's not traditional, but it's real. And I think that scares you more than those rich boys ever did." "You don't understand," Sophia whispered. "Then explain it to me." For a moment, Daniel thought she might. Her mouth opened, and he could see the words gathering behind her eyes, the truth, whatever it was, fighting to break free. But then her phone buzzed, and she glanced down at the screen. The change in her expression was immediate and dramatic. Color drained from her face and her hands began to shake. "I have to go," she said, but her voice was different now, smaller, scared in a way that had nothing to do with college bullies or emotional vulnerability. "Sophia, what's wrong?" She was already walking away, her books clutched against her chest like armor. "I'm sorry, Daniel, for everything, but this has to stop." Daniel watched her hurry toward the meridian, noting the way she kept glancing at her phone, the way her shoulders hunched, as if she were trying to make herself smaller. Every instinct he'd developed over 20 years of military service was screaming that something was wrong. He gave her a 5-minute head start, then followed. The Meridian's lobby was elegant in the way that only came with serious money: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, artwork that probably cost more than Daniel made in a year. The doorman, who'd nodded politely at Sophia, now regarded Daniel with obvious suspicion. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'm campus security," Daniel said, showing his badge. "I need to check on one of the residents, Sophia Lane. She seemed distressed when she left campus." The doorman's expression didn't change. "I'm sorry, sir, but we don't have anyone by that name living here." Daniel felt ice settle in his stomach. "Excuse me, Sophia Lane. There's no one in our system with that name. But I just saw her go in. Young woman, dark hair, about 5'6". "Oh, you mean Miss Sterling?" The doorman's entire demeanor shifted, becoming more deferential. "Yes, she came through a few minutes ago, but I'm afraid I can't provide information about our residents without proper authorization." Sterling. The name hit Daniel like a physical blow. Edward Sterling. Sterling Industries. One of the most powerful CEOs in the country. A man whose business empire spanned technology, real estate, and media. A man whose daughter would be worth billions, and whose every move would be scrutinized by board shareholders and society pages. A man whose daughter would have very good reasons to pretend to be someone else. Daniel stood in that marble lobby for 5 full minutes, pieces of a puzzle clicking together in his mind. The careful way Sophia chose her words, the expensive apartment, the perfect posture and etiquette, the way she'd talked about family expectations and stepping away from who people expected her to be, the way she'd asked if someone could care about you without really knowing who you were. "Sir." The doorman was watching him with increasing concern. "Are you all right?" "Fine," Daniel managed. "Thank you for your time." He walked back to campus in a daze, his mind reeling with implications. Cassandra Sterling. It had to be Cassandra Edward Sterling's daughter, the heir to the Sterling fortune. He'd seen her picture in business magazines, though always at formal events, perfectly made up and dressed in designer clothes. Nothing like the girl in worn jeans and a coffee shop apron who'd been studying across from him for 3 weeks. The girl he'd been falling for. Because that's what had been happening, Daniel realized with crystal clarity. Somewhere between the first night he'd protected her and tonight's abrupt goodbye, he'd stopped thinking of Sophia as just another student and started thinking of her as, what a friend. Something more. The thought should have been ridiculous. He was 38 years old, a single father working campus security to pay the bills. She was 21 and worth more money than he could comprehend. Under normal circumstances, they never would have met, much less spent hours talking about books and life and loneliness. But the circumstances hadn't been normal. She'd been pretending to be someone else, and he'd been treating her like a person instead of a bank account with legs. And in that artificial bubble, something real had grown between them. Something that was now shattered by the weight of her deception. Daniel's phone buzzed. Allison calling. "Hey, sweetheart," he answered, grateful for the distraction. "Dad, you sound weird. What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, just tired." Uh-huh. Allison had inherited her mother's ability to read him like a book, even over the phone. "Dad, you know you can talk to me, right? About stuff that's bothering you." Daniel smiled despite his turmoil. His daughter had grown up so much in the past year, becoming someone he could lean on instead of just someone he protected. "I know, kiddo. It's just complicated adult stuff." "Does it involve a woman?" "What makes you ask that?" "Because you've sounded different the past few weeks. Happier, I guess. And now you sound like someone kicked your dog." Allison paused. "Plus, Mrs. Chen from downstairs said she saw you walking with someone a couple times when she was coming home late from her nursing shifts." Daniel groaned. "Remind me why I live in a building where the neighbors actually pay attention to each other. Because it's all we can afford, and Mrs. Chen makes amazing dumplings." Allison's voice grew serious. "Dad, whatever happened, you know you deserve to be happy, right? Mom would want that for you." The casual mention of Sarah hit Daniel right in the chest, as it always did. "I know she would, baby. It's just, this particular situation is more complicated than I thought." "How complicated?" Daniel considered how to explain without going into details he couldn't share. "Remember when you were in high school, and you had that friend who turned out to have been lying about her family situation? Jenny. Yeah, she said her parents were divorced when they were actually just separated and trying to work things out." "Right. And you felt betrayed because you'd shared personal stuff with her based on what you thought was mutual honesty." "Yeah." Allison's voice grew thoughtful. "But then I realized she was probably lying because she was embarrassed about her parents fighting all the time, not because she wanted to hurt me." "Exactly. The question is, how do you move forward when someone you care about hasn't been completely honest with you, but you think they had good reasons?" "Dad, are we still talking about me and Jenny?" Daniel laughed. "Not entirely, no." "Okay. Well, in my vast 18-year-old wisdom, I'd say it depends on whether they were lying to protect themselves or to hurt you, and whether they're willing to be honest now that you know the truth. And if they're not ready to be honest, then maybe they're not ready for whatever relationship you're trying to have with them. But that doesn't mean they never will be." Daniel stopped walking. Sometimes his daughter's clarity astounded him. "When did you get so smart?" "I learned from my dad," Allison said simply. "He taught me that the most important thing is treating people with dignity even when they make mistakes. Especially when they make mistakes." After they hung up, Daniel found himself standing outside his apartment building, staring up at the windows and thinking about dignity and mistakes and second chances. Somewhere across town, Cassandra Sterling was probably dealing with whatever had caused that look of terror when she'd checked her phone. And tomorrow, he'd go back to his security rounds, and she'd go back to what her real life, her corporate responsibilities. Would she keep coming to the coffee shop, or had tonight been the end of whatever they'd been building? Daniel didn't know. But as he climbed the stairs to his small apartment, he found himself hoping that Allison was right about second chances. Because despite the lies, despite the impossible gulf between their worlds, he wasn't ready to give up on Sophia Lane. Even if Sophia Lane didn't technically exist. Meanwhile, 20 floors above the city, Cassandra Sterling sat in her penthouse apartment staring at her phone, and the text message that had changed everything, board meeting moved to tomorrow. Your presence required. Time to end this college experiment and focus on real responsibilities. Father. She'd known this day would come eventually. The careful balance she'd maintained for 3 months, living as Sophia Lane while fulfilling her duties as Cassandra Sterling, had always been temporary. Her father had indulged her research project into normal college life because it served his purposes, giving him material for speeches about understanding the common worker and staying connected to everyday Americans. But the indulgence was over. The board was getting restless about her absence from company functions. Shareholders were asking questions about the Sterling heir's commitment to the family business. And Edward Sterling never let personal desires interfere with corporate necessities. The worst part wasn't giving up her freedom or returning to a life of board meetings and charity galas. The worst part was the look that would be in Daniel Cross's eyes when he learned the truth, because he would learn it. Men like Daniel didn't let mysteries go unsolved, and she'd left too many clues, made too many mistakes. The doorman calling her Miss Sterling, her reaction to her father's text, the way she'd fled like a criminal when all Daniel had done was see through her carefully constructed facade. He'd figure it out, and then he'd realize that everything she'd told him was a lie. That the girl he'd protected, the woman he'd grown to care about, was actually one of those privileged elite he clearly despised. That she'd been playing dress-up while he'd been genuinely opening his heart. Cassandra walked to her floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere down there, Daniel was probably finishing his patrol, maybe grabbing a late dinner, certainly not thinking about the Sterling Industries heiress who'd been lying to him for weeks. By tomorrow night, he'd know the truth. And by tomorrow night, Sophia Lane would cease to exist entirely. But tonight, she was still real. Tonight, she could still remember what it felt like to be seen as just a person instead of a business opportunity. Tonight, she could still hold on to the memory of sitting across from a man who'd cared about her thoughts instead of her trust fund. Her phone buzzed again. Another text, this one from her personal assistant. Car will pick you up at 8 a.m. for hair and makeup. Board meeting at 2 p.m. Your father wants you in the Navy Armani suit. Patricia Cassandra deleted the message without responding and turned away from the window. Tomorrow she'd return to being Edward Sterling's daughter, the Sterling Industries heiress, the woman who'd never worked a day in a coffee shop or sat on a public bench talking about books with a security guard. But tonight she was still Sophia Lane. And Sophia Lane was going to allow herself to grieve for something beautiful that had never really existed at all. She fell asleep on her Italian leather sofa, still wearing her worn jeans and faded sweater, still smelling faintly of coffee and university libraries. When she woke up 6 hours later, Patricia would be there with a team of stylists to transform her back into Cassandra Sterling. But for now, in the space between sleeping and waking, she dreamed of a man who'd looked at her and seen someone worth protecting, and she allowed herself to pretend that version of herself was real. 3 miles away, Daniel Cross lay awake in his own bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the same thing. The difference was, he'd already decided that the version of Sophia he'd fallen for was real, regardless of her name or her bank account. The question was whether she'd give him the chance to prove it. Neither of them slept well that night, and neither of them had any idea that in 12 hours their careful, separate worlds would collide in the most public way possible. The morning came too quickly for both of them. Daniel arrived at campus an hour early, his usual routine disrupted by a restless night and too much coffee. He told himself he was just being thorough, checking the perimeters, making sure everything was secure for the day ahead. He absolutely was not hoping to catch a glimpse of Sophia heading to her morning classes, but his feet carried him past the coffee shop anyway, and his eyes automatically scanned the outdoor seating area where her corner table sat empty. The barista inside, Marcus Daniel, had learned his name over the weeks, waved through the window with a concerned expression. "She okay?" Marcus asked when Daniel stopped in for his morning coffee. Sophia, I mean. She seemed really upset when she left last night. I don't know, Daniel admitted, accepting the steaming cup. Did she say anything to you? Marcus shook his head. Just thanked me for everything and said she might not be coming in for a while. Seemed like she was saying goodbye. He paused, studying Daniel's face. You two have a fight or something. Something like that. Daniel took a sip of his coffee, noting absently that Marcus had made it exactly the way he liked it. Black, no sugar, strong enough to wake the dead. 3 weeks of casual interaction, and the kid had been paying attention. Just like Sophia had been paying attention when she'd mentioned that he never ate during his shifts. The thought sent a fresh wave of loss through him. All those small observations, those tiny moments of connection, had any of it been real? For what it's worth, Marcus said, wiping down the counter with unnecessary vigor. I think she really cared about you. The way she'd light up when you'd walk by, how she'd always save you that corner table even when we were packed. That's not something you fake. Daniel wanted to believe that. God, how he wanted to believe that. His radio crackled to life, dispatching him to the north side of campus for a minor incident. As he walked away from the coffee shop, Daniel forced himself to focus on work. Whatever was happening with Sophia, with Cassandra, would have to wait. He had a job to do. What he didn't know was that across town, a convoy of black Mercedes-Benz vehicles was pulling up to the Meridian Apartments, and Cassandra Sterling was preparing for the performance of her lifetime. The transformation had taken 2 hours. Patricia and her team had worked with military precision, turning Sophia Lane back into Cassandra Sterling with the efficiency of a Formula One pit crew. The worn jeans and faded sweater were gone, replaced by the navy Armani suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her hair had been styled into a perfect chignon, her makeup applied with the kind of precision that suggested she'd never spent a late night studying in a coffee shop. Looking in the mirror, Cassandra barely recognized herself. This polished woman with her perfect posture and calculated smile bore no resemblance to the girl who'd sat across from Daniel Cross, talking about books and loneliness and the weight of other people's expectations. Miss Sterling, Patricia's voice cut through her reverie. The car is waiting. Cassandra nodded, slipping into the persona she'd worn for most of her 21 years. Shoulders back, chin up, expression pleasantly neutral. The mask of the Sterling heiress designed to reveal nothing and promise everything. The ride to Sterling Industries headquarters was conducted in silence, Cassandra staring out the tinted windows at a city that looked different from this perspective. From inside the coffee shop, the streets had seemed welcoming, full of possibility. From inside a Mercedes that cost more than most people's houses, those same streets looked like a chessboard, and she was just another piece being moved according to someone else's strategy. The Sterling Industries building dominated 3 city blocks, its glass and steel facade reflecting the morning sun like a mirror. Cassandra had been coming here since she was a child, accompanying her father to bring your daughter to work, days that were really just photo opportunities for the company newsletter. She knew these halls better than she knew her own apartment could navigate the executive floors blindfolded. But today, walking through the marble lobby in her designer heels, she felt like a stranger in her own life. Miss Sterling. The elevator operator, yes, they still had elevator operators, because Edward Sterling believed in maintaining certain standards, nodded respectfully. Your father is waiting in the executive conference room. The 42nd floor. The inner sanctum. The place where decisions affecting thousands of employees and millions of shareholders were made with the casual precision of ordering lunch. Cassandra stepped off the elevator and immediately felt the weight of 24 pairs of eyes. The Sterling Industries Board of Directors, captains of industry, former politicians, titans of finance, all turning to assess Edward Sterling's heir as she entered the room. Gentlemen, her father's voice carried the kind of authority that came from never being questioned. My daughter Cassandra Sterling. Edward Sterling stood at the head of a conference table that could have doubled as a landing strip, his silver hair perfectly styled, his charcoal suit impeccable. At 58, he was still an imposing figure, the kind of man who could silence a room with a glance and reshape markets with a phone call. Cassandra, he said, his tone warming slightly as she approached. Thank you for joining us. The words were welcoming, but his eyes told a different story. They said that her 3-month experiment was over, that real life was resuming, and that any protests would be noted and ignored. Of course, Father. Cassandra took her seat at his right hand, the position that had been hers since she'd turned 18 and officially joined the company's board. I apologize for my absence. No need to apologize, Edward said smoothly, addressing the room rather than his daughter. Cassandra has been conducting valuable research into the experiences of our entry-level workforce, living among them, understanding their perspectives, market research at its most fundamental level. Several board members nodded approvingly. This was the story they'd been told, that the Sterling heiress had been conducting an elaborate study gathering intelligence that would help the company better understand its employees and customers. It wasn't entirely untrue. Cassandra had learned things about herself and others that no business school could have taught her. She'd learned what it felt like to worry about money, to work for minimum wage, to be judged not by your family name, but by your character. She'd learned that kindness from strangers could mean more than expensive gifts from people who wanted something from you. She'd learned what it felt like to be loved for who she was rather than what she could provide. The insights Cassandra has gathered will be invaluable as we move forward with our workforce development initiatives, Edward continued. But now it's time to apply those insights to her real responsibilities. The presentation that followed was everything Cassandra had expected and dreaded. Quarterly reports, expansion plans, merger possibilities, stock projections. The language of business that had been her second tongue since childhood, numbers and strategies and market positions that would determine the livelihoods of thousands of people she'd never meet. She participated when expected, offering observations that were received with the kind of respectful attention accorded to someone who would someday control a multi-billion-dollar empire. Her comments were insightful, her questions sharp, her suggestions practical. Every inch the brilliant heiress her father had trained her to be. But part of her mind was elsewhere, thinking about a man who probably didn't even know her real name yet, wondering if he was walking his patrol routes and noticing that she wasn't at her corner table. The university expansion project, board member Harrison Wells was saying, his voice cutting through her distraction. We've identified several properties for acquisition, including some adjacent to the State University campus. Cassandra's attention snapped back to the present. Which properties? Wells consulted his tablet. Several commercial buildings on 5th Street, a small shopping complex, some student housing that's seen better days, and he paused, looking directly at her. There's also a coffee shop that's been operating under a long-term lease. Charming little place, but not particularly profitable. We'll be offering the owners a generous buyout. The coffee shop. Marcus's workplace. The place where she'd spent 3 months pretending to be someone else, where she'd fallen in love with the idea of being ordinary. What happens to the current employees? She heard herself ask. Standard severance packages, Wells replied dismissively. Though most of them are college students anyway. They'll find other part-time work. Cassandra thought of Marcus, who was putting himself through culinary school with his earnings from the coffee shop. Of the other students who depended on those jobs to pay for textbooks and rent, and the thousand small expenses that came with trying to better yourself. What if we kept the coffee shop operational? She suggested. Made it part of the student center complex. It already has an established clientele. Several board members exchanged glances. Her father's expression didn't change, but she caught the slight tightening around his eyes that meant he was displeased with the direction of the conversation. "Cassandra," Edward said smoothly, "I'm sure your time among the workforce has given you a certain sentimental attachment to these establishments. But we're not in the business of running coffee shops. We're in the business of maximizing shareholder value." The dismissal was polite but final. The coffee shop would be closed, the employees would be let go, and another small piece of the community would disappear in the name of corporate efficiency. Cassandra nodded and said nothing more, but something cold and angry was building in her chest. These men spoke about human lives like line items in a budget, reduced people to numbers on a spreadsheet. They would destroy Marcus's livelihood and dozens of others without a second thought, because that's what made financial sense. 3 months ago, she would have agreed with them. She would have seen the cold logic in their decision and applauded their commitment to profitability. But 3 months ago, she hadn't known what it felt like to depend on a minimum wage job, hadn't understood that behind every redundant employee was a person with dreams and responsibilities and fears. 3 months ago, she hadn't known what it felt like to be seen as a person rather than a profit center. The meeting dragged on for another 2 hours, covering everything from international investments to domestic market expansion. Cassandra participated when necessary, her responses automatic, her mind increasingly elsewhere. When they finally adjourned, Edward lingered as the other board members filed out. "Walk with me," he said, not quite a request. They took his private elevator to the executive floor, walking past offices occupied by vice presidents and senior directors who nodded respectfully as they passed. Edward's corner office was a monument to corporate success, floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the city walls lined with awards and photographs of him shaking hands with presidents and prime ministers. "Sit," he said, settling behind a desk that had once belonged to a 19th-century railroad baron. "We need to discuss your future." Cassandra took the chair across from him, the same chair where she'd sat as a child, while he explained why she couldn't have a normal birthday party, why she couldn't attend public school, why her life would always be different from other children's lives. "Your experiment is over," Edward said without preamble. "It was educational, I'm sure. But now it's time to focus on your real responsibilities. The board is impressed with your insights, but they need to see commitment, dedication to the family business." "I understand. Do you—" His pale blue eyes studied her face with the intensity he usually reserved for quarterly reports. "Because I get the impression that your time playing dress-up has given you some romanticized notions about the working class. That coffee shop comment, for instance. Very touching, but entirely impractical. Those people have names, father, lives, families depending on their income. And they'll find other jobs. That's how the economy works, Cassandra. Creative destruction. Old businesses fail, new opportunities emerge. We're not running a charity." Cassandra bit back the response that sprang to her lips. She'd heard variations of this speech her entire life, the gospel of capitalism according to Edward Sterling. Individual hardship was acceptable, necessary, even as long as it served the greater good of economic growth. "There's something else we need to discuss," Edward continued, opening a file folder that had been sitting on his desk. "Your social calendar. Patricia has lined up several events over the next month. The Metropolitan Museum Gala, the Children's Hospital fundraiser, the Young Professionals Leadership Award ceremony." He slid a photograph across the desk. A young man in an expensive suit, handsome in the way that suggested good breeding and better dental work. "Jonathan Hartwell. Harvard MBA father owns Hartwell Technologies. He's expressed interest in getting to know you better. Cassandra stared at the photograph, understanding immediately what her father was suggesting. Jonathan Hartwell was exactly the kind of man the Sterling family would approve of: wealthy, connected, ambitious. A strategic alliance disguised as romance. "I'm not interested in dating right now," she said carefully. "This isn't about dating, Cassandra. This is about building the relationships that will serve you when you take over this company." Jonathan's father controls several defense contracts that would be valuable additions to our portfolio. Everything was a transaction in Edward Sterling's world. Marriages, friendships, even familial relationships, all of them were just different forms of business deals evaluated based on their potential return on investment. What if I said no? The question slipped out before Cassandra could stop it. Edward's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. No to what specifically? All of it. The galas, the strategic relationships, the board meetings. What if I said I wanted something different? Different how? Cassandra thought of Daniel Cross, of conversations that had nothing to do with stock prices or market share, of being valued for her thoughts rather than her connections, her character rather than her trust fund. What if I wanted to be with someone you wouldn't approve of? She said the words tumbling out before she could consider their implications. Someone who wasn't wealthy, or connected, or strategically valuable. Edward was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled in front of him. When he finally spoke, his voice was perfectly calm, which somehow made his words more terrifying than if he'd shouted. "Then I would remind you that your trust fund, your position in this company, and your ability to live the lifestyle you've enjoyed your entire life are all dependent on my goodwill. I would remind you that you have responsibilities to this family, to our shareholders, to the thousands of people whose livelihoods depend on Sterling Industries' success." He leaned forward slightly, his pale eyes never leaving her face. "And I would remind you that love is a luxury that people in our position cannot afford. You can care about someone, certainly. You can even be fond of them. But you cannot allow emotion to override practical considerations. That's how empires fall, Cassandra. That's how families lose everything they've worked for generations to build." The words hit her like physical blows. Everything she'd felt over the past 3 months. The connection with Daniel, the joy of being seen as just herself, reduced to impractical emotion that threatened the family legacy. "Do you understand me?" Edward asked. Cassandra nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good. Now there's one more matter we need to address." He pulled out another file, this one thicker than the first. "It seems your security guard friend has been asking questions." Ice flooded Cassandra's veins. "What kind of questions?" "He went to the Meridian last night, asked about Sophia Lane. The doorman quite properly told him no one by that name lived there. But he also mentioned that the man seemed quite determined to understand who you really are." Edward opened the file, revealing what looked like a comprehensive dossier. Photographs, service records, financial information, even school records for Daniel's daughter. Daniel Cross. Edward read from the top page. 38 years old, 20-year Army veteran, currently employed as campus security at State University. Divorced, one daughter, Allison Cross, currently a freshman at the same institution. Lives in a 1-bedroom apartment, drives a 10-year-old pickup truck, earns approximately $38,000 annually. Hearing Daniel's life reduced to a few statistics made Cassandra feel physically sick. This wasn't how you described someone you cared about, by their income and possessions, as if their value could be calculated on a spreadsheet. "He seems like a good man." Edward continued, his tone suggesting this was somehow a character flaw. "Decorated war hero, devoted father, no criminal record. The kind of person who believes in protecting people doing the right thing." He closed the file. The kind of person who might cause problems if he believes someone he cares about is being treated poorly. Are you threatening him? I'm explaining the situation to you. Edward's voice remained perfectly level. Mr. Cross has developed feelings for someone who doesn't exist. Sophia Lane was a character you created, a role you played. Now that role is finished, and it's time for everyone to return to reality. And if he doesn't want to return to reality, if he tries to contact me, then he'll discover that Cassandra Sterling is far above his reach, and that any attempts to continue their association would be unwelcome. Edward stood moving to the window that overlooked the city. I trust I don't need to be more specific about what unwelcome might entail for someone in his position. The threat was clear, even though it was never explicitly stated. Edward Sterling had the power to destroy Daniel's career, to make his life impossible in ways both obvious and subtle. One phone call could get him fired from campus security. Another could ensure he never worked in law enforcement again. A third could make life difficult for his daughter at the university. You wouldn't, Cassandra whispered. I would do whatever was necessary to protect this family and our interests, Edward replied. Just as you will do whatever is necessary. Because that's who we are, Cassandra. That's what our position in the world requires. He returned to his desk, sitting down as if the conversation was finished. Patricia has arranged for a car to take you home. You have a fitting at 4 for the Metropolitan Museum Gala. Jonathan Hartwell will be your escort. Cassandra stood on unsteady legs, her mind reeling with everything her father had just told her. In the span of 30 minutes, he'd managed to destroy the coffee shop where she'd worked, threaten the man she cared about, and arrange her romantic life with someone she'd never met. Cassandra. Her father's voice stopped her at the door. I know this seems harsh, but everything I do is to protect our family's legacy. Someday, when you're sitting in this chair, you'll understand that difficult decisions are the price of power. She nodded, because it was expected, then walked out of his office with as much dignity as she could muster. But inside she was falling apart. The elevator ride down seemed to take forever, each floor marking her descent back into a life that felt like an expensive prison. By the time she reached the lobby, Cassandra had made a decision that would change everything. She wasn't going home to prepare for the Metropolitan Museum Gala. She wasn't going to her fitting, and she wasn't going to smile politely while Jonathan Hartwell evaluated her suitability as a strategic alliance. She was going to find Daniel Cross and tell him the truth before her father's threats became reality. The problem was that she had no idea where to start looking, and she was running out of time. Meanwhile, across the city, Daniel was dealing with his own crisis of conscience. The name Sterling had been echoing in his head all morning, and by lunchtime he'd made the decision to do what he did best: investigate. A quick internet search had confirmed his worst fears and answered his biggest questions. Cassandra Sterling, daughter of billionaire CEO Edward Sterling. 21 years old, Stanford educated before transferring back to the state university for reasons that were never fully explained in the business press. Heir to a fortune that would make her one of the wealthiest women in America. And absolutely, completely out of his league. The photographs showed a polished young woman at charity galas and corporate events, always perfectly dressed, always smiling, the kind of smile that revealed nothing. She bore only a passing resemblance to the girl who'd sat across from him at the coffee shop talking about books and loneliness. Daniel sat in his small apartment during his lunch break, staring at his laptop screen and trying to reconcile the images with his memories. Every conversation they'd had took on a different meaning when viewed through this new lens. Her careful word choices, her obvious education, her unconscious poise, it all made sense now. She'd been slumming. playing at being ordinary while knowing she could return to her privileged life whenever she chose. And he'd been the fool who'd fallen for her performance. His phone rang, interrupting his spiral of self-recrimination. "Dad?" Allison's voice was strange, tight, with an emotion he couldn't identify. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to not freak out." "What's wrong?" Daniel was immediately alert, his paternal instincts overriding everything else. "I'm okay," Allison said quickly. "But there were some guys here earlier asking questions about you, and about me." Ice formed in Daniel's stomach. What kind of guys? What kind of questions? They said they were doing a background check for a security clearance, but it felt weird. They wanted to know about your finances, whether you had any debts or personal problems. They asked if you'd been acting strange lately, if you'd mentioned meeting any new people. Daniel's mind was racing. Security clearance checks were routine, but not for campus security guards. And the timing, the focus on new people, it wasn't a coincidence. "Dad, there's something else. They showed me a picture. Asked if I'd ever seen this woman with you." "What did she look like?" "Dark hair, green eyes, really pretty. The weird thing is, she looked familiar, but not from seeing her with you. More like I'd seen her picture somewhere before." Cassandra Sterling. Someone was investigating his connection to her, which meant someone knew about their relationship and considered it a problem worth addressing. "What did you tell them?" Daniel asked. "I said I'd never seen her before, which is technically true. But Dad, what's going on? Are you in some kind of trouble?" Daniel closed his eyes, thinking fast. If someone was investigating him because of Cassandra, it meant her family knew about their connection and weren't happy about it. Rich families had resources, influence, the ability to make problems disappear. The ability to make people disappear. "Listen to me carefully," he said to Allison. "If anyone else comes around asking questions, you don't know anything. You haven't seen me with anyone you don't know about any new relationships, nothing. Can you do that for me?" "Dad, you're scaring me." "I'm trying to protect you," Daniel said. "There are some very powerful people who might want to cause problems for our family. The less you know, the safer you are." After he hung up, Daniel sat in his apartment and considered his options. He could walk away, pretend the past 3 months had never happened, return to his quiet life of security patrols and single parenthood. It would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. But he'd spent 20 years in the military learning to stand up for what was right, even when it was dangerous. And he'd spent the last 3 weeks falling for a woman who might have lied about her name but hadn't lied about her loneliness, her intelligence, or her genuine desire to be seen as more than her family's expectations. The question was whether she was worth fighting for, and whether she wanted to be fought for. There was only one way to find out. Daniel changed into his best clothes, not saying much, but the best he had, and drove toward the Sterling Industries building. He had no plan beyond finding Cassandra and demanding the truth, but sometimes the direct approach was the only one that worked. He was halfway downtown when his radio crackled with an emergency dispatch. All available security personnel were needed at the university immediately. Some kind of incident at the career fair. Daniel made a U-turn and headed back to campus, his personal crisis temporarily set aside in favor of professional duty. But as he drove, he couldn't shake the feeling that somehow the emergency and his investigation were connected. He was about to find out how right he was. The career fair was being held in the university's largest auditorium, with dozens of companies setting up booths to recruit graduating students. It was the kind of event that usually ran smoothly, with the biggest problems being overcrowded booths and students nervous about their first job interviews. But when Daniel arrived, he could see that something was very different about today. Black cars lined the street outside the auditorium. Serious-looking men in expensive suits stood at intervals speaking into earpieces and watching the crowd with professional alertness. And at the center of it all, a media presence that suggested someone very important was about to make an appearance. Daniel's radio crackled again, directing him to the main entrance. As he approached, he could see a red carpet being rolled out, photographers setting up equipment, and a crowd of students gathering to see what was happening. "What's the situation?" he asked Jim Patterson, the head of campus security. "VIP visit," Patterson replied, checking his tablet. "Edward Sterling, CEO of Sterling Industries. Apparently, he's making some kind of major announcement about university partnerships. We're supposed to keep the crowd controlled and the pathways clear." Edward Sterling, Cassandra's father. Daniel felt like the universe was playing an elaborate practical joke on him. Here he was trying to find answers about his relationship with the Sterling heiress, and her father was literally coming to him. "ETA?" Daniel asked. 5 minutes, Patterson said. "And Cross, this is a big deal. Sterling Industries employs half the graduates from our business school. Whatever he's announcing could mean major funding for the university. So let's make sure everything goes smoothly." Daniel nodded and took his assigned position near the main entrance, his mind racing with possibilities. Was this just a coincidence, or was Edward Sterling's visit somehow connected to the investigation into Daniel's relationship with his daughter? A few minutes later, the convoy arrived. 3 black Mercedes-Benz vehicles moving with the precision of a military operation. Security personnel emerged first, scanning the crowd, checking sight lines, creating a protective perimeter. Then Edward Sterling stepped out of the lead vehicle. Daniel had seen pictures of the billionaire CEO, but they hadn't prepared him for the man's physical presence. Sterling was tall, imposing with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. He moved through the crowd like he owned not just the university, but everyone in it. But it was the second figure emerging from the car that made Daniel's breath catch in his throat. Cassandra Sterling stepped onto the red carpet, wearing a navy blue suit that probably cost more than Daniel's annual salary. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, her posture radiating the kind of poise that came from years of finishing school and etiquette lessons. She looked nothing like Sophia Lane, and everything like the Sterling heiress from the business magazine photographs. But when her eyes swept the crowd and found his, Daniel saw something that the cameras couldn't capture: terror, desperation, and what looked like an apology. Their eyes met across the sea of students and media, and in that instant Daniel understood that this wasn't a coincidence at all. This was Edward Sterling's way of ending his daughter's experiment publicly, of making it clear to everyone, including Daniel Cross, exactly who Cassandra Sterling was and where she belonged. The question was whether she was here willingly or if she was as much a prisoner of this moment as he was a witness to it. Either way, Daniel realized the careful balance they'd maintained for 3 months was about to be shattered in the most public way possible. And there wasn't a damn thing either of them could do to stop it. The moment Edward Sterling stepped onto the makeshift stage, the entire auditorium fell silent. Even the most restless students seemed to understand they were in the presence of someone who could reshape their futures with a single decision. "Ladies and gentlemen," the university president's voice boomed through the sound system. "Please welcome Edward Sterling, CEO of Sterling Industries, and his daughter, Miss Cassandra Sterling." The applause was thunderous, but Daniel barely heard it. He was focused entirely on Cassandra, noting the way she held herself, spine-rigid smile perfectly in place, but her hands clenched so tightly at her sides that her knuckles were white. She looked like someone being led to an execution rather than a corporate announcement. Edward Sterling approached the microphone with the confidence of a man accustomed to commanding attention. "Thank you for that warm welcome. He began, his voice carrying easily through the auditorium. I'm here today to announce an exciting partnership between Sterling Industries and this fine institution, a partnership that will create opportunities for students and strengthen our community. Daniel watched from his position near the side entrance, close enough to see Cassandra's face as her father spoke. She was scanning the crowd, her eyes moving systematically across the sea of faces until they found his again. When their gazes locked, she mouthed a single word that made his chest tighten with understanding. Sorry. But first, Edward continued, I want to share something personal with you. For the past 3 months, my daughter Cassandra has been conducting an extraordinary research project. She's been living among you, working alongside you, experiencing firsthand what it means to be a college student in America today. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several students turned to look at each other, confusion evident on their faces. They were trying to reconcile the polished woman on stage with any classmate they might recognize. Some of you may know her as Sophia Lane, Edward said, and the murmurs grew louder. She worked at the coffee shop on 5th Street, attended classes, lived the authentic college experience. All of it was part of an intensive research project designed to help Sterling Industries better understand and serve the communities where we operate. The revelation hit the audience like a physical wave. Students began talking excitedly, phones emerged to capture the moment, and somewhere in the crowd, Daniel heard Marcus's distinctive voice saying, "Holy shit, Sophia's a billionaire!" But Daniel's attention was fixed on Cassandra's face as her father continued speaking. With each word, he watched her withdraw further into herself, her expression becoming more carefully neutral, more perfectly controlled. The woman who'd sat across from him talking about books and dreams was disappearing, replaced by the sterling heiress who knew how to smile for cameras and never reveal what she was really thinking. The insights Cassandra has gained will be invaluable as we move forward with our expansion plans, Edward was saying, including a significant investment in this campus and the surrounding community. Sterling Industries will be acquiring several properties in the area, developing student housing, creating internship programs, and establishing a permanent recruiting presence here. More applause, but it sounded different now, more calculated, as if everyone was trying to figure out how this announcement might benefit them personally. But the most important thing my daughter has learned, Edward continued, his voice growing warmer, more paternal, is that there's no substitute for authentic experience, for understanding the world from ground level. The connections she's made, the relationships she's built, all of it has given her a deeper appreciation for the communities Sterling Industries serves. Daniel felt sick. Edward Sterling was taking their relationship, the genuine connection he'd shared with Cassandra, and turning it into a corporate success story. Every conversation, every moment of honesty, every instance of real caring was being reframed as market research. So today, Edward concluded, I'm proud to announce not just our partnership with this university, but my daughter's return to her full responsibilities as heir to the Sterling Industries legacy. Cassandra will be taking on expanded duties within the company, including oversight of our community development initiatives. The applause was deafening, but Daniel noticed that Cassandra wasn't smiling anymore. She was staring directly at him, her green eyes filled with what looked like desperation. Then the moment was over. Edward Sterling was shaking hands with university officials. Photographers were capturing every angle, and security personnel were beginning to clear pathways for the VIP's departure. Daniel knew he had seconds before Cassandra disappeared back into her protected world, possibly forever. Without thinking, he started moving toward the stage, using his security badge to push through the crowd. "Sir, you need to stay back," one of Sterling's security team said, stepping into Daniel's path. "I'm campus security," Daniel replied, showing his badge. "I need to speak with Miss Sterling." "That's not possible right now. She has other commitments." Daniel looked over the man's shoulder and saw Cassandra being guided toward a side exit, her father's hand on her elbow in what looked supportive but felt controlling. In 30 seconds, she'd be gone. "Cassandra!" Daniel called out, his voice carrying across the commotion. Her head snapped around, and for a moment, the carefully constructed facade cracked completely. He saw the woman who'd confided in him about family pressure, who'd talked about wanting to matter for who she was rather than what she represented. Edward Sterling's head turned too, his pale eyes locking onto Daniel with laser-like intensity. In that instant, Daniel knew he'd made a mistake. The billionaire CEO was cataloging every detail of his appearance, making mental notes that would undoubtedly be acted upon later. But Cassandra was looking at him like he was her only lifeline, and Daniel had never been able to walk away from someone who needed help. "I need to talk to you," he said, addressing her directly, despite the security personnel now surrounding him. "Miss Sterling has no further comments at this time," one of her father's people interjected. "I wasn't asking for a comment," Daniel replied, not taking his eyes off Cassandra. "I was asking for a conversation." Edward Sterling stepped forward, his expression pleasant, but his voice carrying undertones of steel. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cross. Daniel Cross. Mr. Cross. I'm sure you understand that my daughter has many responsibilities. Perhaps you could schedule something through her assistant." It was a polite dismissal that everyone present understood was final. But Daniel had spent too many years in the military to be intimidated by corporate power plays. "With respect, sir, this is between your daughter and me." The temperature in the immediate area seemed to drop 10 degrees. Edward Sterling wasn't accustomed to being challenged publicly, and the surrounding security personnel tensed visibly. "Cassandra," Daniel said, ignoring everyone else. "If you want to talk, I'll be where we always talk. Tonight at 8. Before anyone could respond, he turned and walked away, his heart pounding, but his pace steady. Behind him, he could hear the buzz of conversation, resuming the sound of departure preparations, continuing. He'd thrown down a gauntlet, and now he had to wait and see if Cassandra Sterling would pick it up. The wait was agony. Daniel finished his shift with mechanical efficiency, his mind replaying every moment of the afternoon's confrontation. By 7:30, he was sitting at their usual table outside the coffee shop, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Marcus had closed early, claiming he needed time to process the fact that one of his regular customers was secretly worth billions of dollars. The streets were quieter than usual, as if the revelation about Cassandra Sterling had somehow changed the fundamental nature of the neighborhood. Daniel checked his phone for the dozenth time. 7:45. If she was coming, she'd be here soon. If she wasn't. At exactly 8 o'clock, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the rear door opened, and Cassandra Sterling stepped out. She'd changed clothes since the afternoon's announcement. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by jeans and a sweater that looked almost but not quite like the clothes Sophia Lane might have worn. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her makeup minimal. She looked like she was trying to bridge the gap between her two identities, not quite succeeding at being either. "You came," Daniel said as she approached the table. "I wasn't sure I would," she admitted, sitting down across from him. "My father made it very clear that this conversation shouldn't happen." "And yet, here you are." Cassandra smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "Here I am, though I'm not sure what good it'll do." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 3 months' worth of lies hanging between them like a physical presence. "So," Daniel said finally. Cassandra Sterling. Yes. Billionaire heiress. Among other things. And Sophia Lane, Cassandra's hands twisted in her lap, was someone I wanted to be. Someone I thought I could be for a little while. Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying her face. Up close, he could see the similarities between the woman sitting across from him and the polished figure from that afternoon. But he could also see the differences, the vulnerability in her eyes, the uncertainty in her posture. Why? He asked. Why what? Why the deception? Why go through all of this? You could have lived any life you wanted. Why choose to work in a coffee shop and pretend to struggle financially? Cassandra was quiet for so long that Daniel thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because I wanted to know what it felt like to be valued for myself, not for my money or my connections or what I could do for someone's career. Just me. She looked up at him then, and Daniel saw tears gathering in her eyes. Do you know what it's like to never be sure if people like you or just what you represent? To wonder if every friendship, every relationship is really just someone positioning themselves for advantage. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. I've been surrounded by people my entire life, but I've been completely alone. The pain in her voice was so raw, so genuine, that Daniel felt something shift in his chest. The anger he'd been carrying since discovering her identity began to transform into something else, understanding maybe, or recognition of a different kind of suffering. So you became Sophia Lane, he said. I became someone who could work for minimum wage and worry about textbook costs and sit in a coffee shop without everyone calculating what they could get from her. Cassandra's smile was bitter. It was supposed to be temporary. Just a semester, maybe two. Long enough to experience what normal felt like. And then I met you. She looked directly at him, her green eyes fierce despite the tears. And for the first time in my life, someone looked at me and saw a person worth protecting. Not because of who my father was or how much money I had access to, but because you thought I was worth protecting. Daniel felt his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. Cassandra, I know what you're thinking, she said quickly. I know how it looks. Rich girl playing dress-up, slumming with the common folk for entertainment. And maybe that's what it was at first. But it stopped being that the night you stepped between me and those boys. It stopped being that when you walked me home because you were worried about my safety. It stopped being that when you listened to me talk about books and dreams like my opinions actually mattered. She reached across the table, her fingers barely touching his. What happened between us wasn't research, Daniel. It wasn't market analysis or social experimentation. It was real. It was the realest thing that's ever happened to me. Daniel stared at their joined hands, his mind warring with his heart. Everything she was saying rang true, but the magnitude of her deception was staggering. She'd let him fall for someone who didn't exist. How much of it was lies? He asked. My name, my background, my living situation. Cassandra's voice was steady, now controlled. Everything else was true. Every conversation we had, every feeling I shared with you, every moment of connection that was real. But you knew it couldn't last. I hoped. She stopped shaking her head. I don't know what I hoped. That maybe I could find a way to bridge both worlds. That maybe you could care about Cassandra Sterling the same way you cared about Sophia Lane. Daniel pulled his hands away, standing up from the table. He walked a few steps away, staring out at the street, where luxury cars occasionally cruised past, the modest shops and restaurants. Do you know what your father did today? he said without turning around. Daniel, I can explain. He had people investigate me, question my daughter, dig into my finances, my service record, probably my grocery shopping habits. Daniel turned back to face her, and Cassandra flinched at the hardness in his expression. He made it very clear that I'm not welcome in your world. My father doesn't control my personal life. Doesn't he? Daniel sat back down, leaning forward across the table. Be honest with me, Cassandra. Completely honest, maybe for the first time since we met. What happens if you choose to keep seeing me? What happens to your trust fund, your position in the company, your relationship with your family? Cassandra's silence was answer enough. And what happens to me? Daniel continued. To my job, my daughter's education, our ability to live peacefully in this community. Your father struck me as someone who doesn't make idle threats. I won't let him hurt you, Cassandra said fiercely. How? What power do you have to stop him? Again, silence. Daniel felt something breaking inside him, not just his heart, but his faith in the possibility that two people from such different worlds could find common ground. This afternoon, he said, I watched your father turn our relationship into a corporate success story. Every moment we shared, every honest conversation, every time you trusted me enough to show me who you really were, he made it all sound like market research. That wasn't how I saw it. But that's how it looked to everyone else. That's how it'll be remembered. Daniel's voice grew quiet. Do you understand what that does to someone? To have the most meaningful relationship of your adult life dismissed as a business transaction. Tears were flowing freely down Cassandra's face now, but she made no move to wipe them away. What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry I am. That I wish things were different, I do. That I love you. Her voice broke on the last word. Because I do, Daniel. I love you in ways I didn't know were possible. But you're right. I don't have the power to protect you from my father, and I don't have the courage to give up everything to be with you. The admission hung between them like a bridge that had been built and burned simultaneously. Daniel could see the truth of it in her eyes. She did love him, but she loved her comfortable life more. There's something else, Daniel said. Your father announced that Sterling Industries is acquiring property in this area, including the coffee shop. Cassandra's face went pale. What? Marcus and all the other employees will lose their jobs. The place where we met, where we talked, where you figured out who you wanted to be, it'll be gone. Probably turned into luxury student housing or upscale retail. I didn't know, Cassandra whispered. Didn't you? Or did you just not want to know? The accusation hit home. Daniel could see it in the way Cassandra's shoulders sagged, the way she looked down at her hands. I was in the board meeting when they discussed it, she admitted. I tried to object, but my father shut me down. He said we weren't in the business of running coffee shops. And you accepted that. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice, Cassandra. You just don't like the consequences of the alternatives. They sat in silence after that, both of them staring at the table rather than each other. Daniel could hear the sounds of evening life around them, students walking to dinner, cars, passing the distant sound of music from someone's apartment. Normal sounds from a normal world that felt increasingly distant. So what happens now? Cassandra asked finally. Now you go back to your penthouse apartment and your board meetings and your strategic relationships with people like Jonathan Hartwell. You become the sterling heiress your father trained you to be. And you, I keep doing my job. I keep taking care of my daughter. I try to forget that for 3 months I thought I'd found someone who could see past my uniform and my paycheck to the person underneath. Cassandra flinched, as if he'd struck her. Daniel, please. Please what? Please pretend this can work somehow. Please ignore the fact that your father can destroy my life. If I inconvenience him, please forget that you chose your comfort over our relationship. I chose survival, Cassandra said, her voice rising. Do you think this is easy for me? Do you think I want to spend the rest of my life attending galas with men who see me as a business opportunity? Do you think I want to smile for cameras and make small talk about stock prices and merger possibilities? But you'll do it anyway. Yes, she whispered. I'll do it anyway, because I'm a coward and because I don't know how to be anything else. The honesty of her admission was devastating. Daniel had expected defiance, justification, maybe anger. He hadn't expected this raw acknowledgement of her own limitations. I used to think, Cassandra continued, that the worst thing about my life was feeling trapped by other people's expectations. But I was wrong. The worst thing is discovering that you're not brave enough to break free, even when you've found something worth fighting for. She stood up from the table, gathering her purse with hands that shook slightly. I need to go, she said. My father is expecting me at a dinner with potential investors. If I'm late, there will be consequences. For you or for me, does it matter? The result is the same. Daniel watched her walk toward the waiting sedan, noting the way she held herself, shoulders back, chin up, every inch the Sterling heiress. But just before she reached the car, she turned back. Daniel, yeah, what we had these past 3 months, it was real. Whatever else happens, whatever lies I told or roles I played, what I felt for you was real. Please don't forget that. How could I forget? Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion. It was the most real thing that's ever happened to me, too. She nodded once, then got into the car and disappeared into the night, leaving Daniel alone at their table with cold coffee and the weight of everything they'd both lost. But neither of them knew that 3 blocks away, Allison Cross was sitting in her dorm room, staring at her laptop screen, and the revelation that was about to change everything. She'd been researching Cassandra Sterling since her father's phone call that afternoon, trying to understand why powerful people were investigating her family. What she'd found was a comprehensive online presence, charity work, business, achievements, society page, appearances. But buried in the archives of the university newspaper, she'd also found something else. A photo from the previous semester's volunteer appreciation event, showing students who'd participated in community service projects. And there, in the back row, barely visible, but definitely present, was her father. Standing next to a dark-haired girl who was identified in the caption as Sophia Lane, freshman volunteer. Allison stared at the photo pieces of a puzzle clicking together in her mind. Her father's changed demeanor over the past few months. The mysterious woman the investigators had asked about. The timing of everything. Her father was in love with Cassandra Sterling, and based on everything she'd just witnessed from her dorm window, she could see the coffee shop from her 3rd-floor room. The feeling was mutual. More importantly, they were both about to give up on something real because they were too scared to fight for it. Allison Cross had inherited her father's protective instincts and her late mother's determination to see love triumph over obstacles. And if 2 adults were too stubborn and scared to fight for their own happiness, maybe they needed an 18-year-old college freshman to show them how it was done. She picked up her phone and started making calls. First to Marcus at the coffee shop, then to several classmates who'd been buzzing about the afternoon's revelation. If she was going to wage a campaign to save her father's relationship, she'd need allies. And she'd need a plan that was bold enough to make both Daniel Cross and Cassandra Sterling realize that some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the consequences. What Allison didn't know was that her plan was about to collide with forces far more powerful than she could imagine, and that her father's relationship with Cassandra Sterling was about to become the center of a battle that would determine not just their happiness, but the future of everyone they cared about. But sometimes the most important battles were fought by the people who were too young to know they were impossible to win. And sometimes impossible was exactly what the situation required. Within 48 hours, Alison Cross had accomplished something that would have impressed military strategists and corporate executives alike. She'd mobilized an army. It started with Marcus, whose initial shock at discovering Sophia's true identity had quickly transformed into protective fury. She wasn't pretending to be nice, he told Alison over coffee in his soon-to-be-closed shop. You can't fake caring about people the way she did. And your dad, man, he looked at her like she was the most important person in the world. From Marcus, the network expanded. Jenny, from Alison's calculus study group, knew someone in the business school who'd actually had classes with Sophia Lane. Tom, from her residence hall, had a cousin who worked as a photographer for the university newspaper. Sarah, from her literature seminar, had an internship at the local TV station. By Thursday morning, Alison had gathered 17 students in the common room of her dormitory, all of them united by a single purpose, preventing two people who clearly loved each other from destroying their relationship out of fear. Here's what I know, Alison said, standing before the group, with the confidence of someone who'd inherited her father's leadership abilities. My dad has been happier these past 3 months than he's been since my mom died. And based on what I saw the other night, Cassandra Sterling was just as happy with him, but they're both too scared to fight for what they have. What exactly are you proposing? Asked Jenny, who'd been skeptical of the entire enterprise until Alison showed her the photo from the volunteer appreciation event. I'm proposing we show them that some things are worth fighting for, and I'm proposing we do it in a way that makes it impossible for Edward Sterling to retaliate against my father. Tom raised his hand. How do you make it impossible for a billionaire to retaliate? Alison smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like her father in his most determined moments. You make the story bigger than he is. The plan that emerged over the next 2 hours was audacious in its simplicity and brilliant in its execution. It would require perfect timing, absolute discretion, and more courage than any of them had ever displayed in their young lives. But it would also create a situation where Edward Sterling's usual tactics, intimidation, financial pressure, professional sabotage, would be not just ineffective, but potentially damaging to his own interests. Are we really doing this? Sarah asked as they prepared to disperse and begin their respective assignments. We're really doing this, Alison confirmed. But everyone needs to understand if this goes wrong, there could be serious consequences for all of us. Marcus, who'd been quiet during most of the planning session, finally spoke up. Sophia Cassandra, whoever she is, she saved my job once. Got me extra hours when I was behind on tuition payments, convinced the manager to let me adjust my schedule around exams. She didn't have to do that, especially knowing she was secretly rich. But she did it anyway. He looked around the room at the assembled students. Maybe she lied about her name and her money. But she didn't lie about caring about people. And if she cares about Daniel the way Daniel clearly cares about her, then they deserve a chance to figure it out without her father pulling the strings. By Friday afternoon, all the pieces were in place. Alison had convinced her father to meet her for dinner at a restaurant downtown. Nothing fancy, just a place where they could talk without interruption. Sarah had used her internship connections to arrange for a news crew to be, coincidentally, nearby. Tom's cousin had positioned himself with his camera equipment at strategic locations around the city. And Marcus had done something that was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. He'd called Sterling Industries and requested a meeting with Cassandra Sterling about the coffee shop closure. What did you tell them? Allison asked during their final coordination call. I told them I wanted to discuss severance packages for the employees, which is technically true. Marcus's voice was nervous but determined. They scheduled me for 5 o'clock at their downtown offices. Said Miss Sterling would meet with me personally as part of her new community outreach responsibilities. And you're sure she'll agree to what we discussed? I'm sure she loves your father enough to take the risk. The question is whether she loves him enough to deal with the consequences. At exactly 4:47 p.m., Daniel Cross received a phone call that changed everything. He was finishing his shift, looking forward to dinner with Allison, and trying not to think about the fact that he hadn't seen Cassandra in 3 days when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Cross, this is Marcus Chen Holmund from the coffee shop. I need your help. Daniel immediately went alert. What's wrong? I'm at Sterling Industries and something's happened to Cassandra. Marcus's voice was tight with genuine concern. She's locked herself in a conference room and won't come out. She keeps asking for you. What do you mean locked herself in? I was meeting with her about the coffee shop closure, and she seemed fine at first. Professional, polite, all that. But then I mentioned your name, said you were worried about how the closure would affect the employees, and she just broke down. Started crying, saying she'd ruined everything that she'd lost, the only person who'd ever really cared about her. Daniel's chest tightened. Marcus, where exactly are you? 40th floor executive conference room. Her father's in meetings all afternoon according to his assistant, so it's just security and some other staff. But Mr. Cross, I think she's really struggling. She keeps saying she can't do this anymore, can't pretend to be someone she's not. Without another word, Daniel ended the call and headed for his truck. Every instinct he'd developed over 20 years of military service was screaming that something was wrong with Marcus's story. The timing was too convenient, the details too perfectly calculated to get him to Sterling Industries. But if there was even a chance that Cassandra was in distress, he couldn't ignore it. 20 minutes later, he was standing in the marble lobby of Sterling Industries, trying to convince a skeptical security guard that he needed to reach the 40th floor immediately. Sir, I understand your concern, the guard was saying, but I can't allow unauthorized personnel to access executive floors without proper clearance. Then call up and verify that Marcus Chen requested my presence. The guard made the call, spoke in low tones for several minutes, then handed Daniel a visitor's badge with obvious reluctance. Elevator Bank C, someone will meet you on 40. As the elevator climbed, Daniel's mind raced with possibilities. Was this a trap orchestrated by Edward Sterling? Some kind of test or manipulation designed to humiliate him publicly? Or was Marcus telling the truth and Cassandra really was in crisis? The elevator doors opened on the 40th floor, and Daniel stepped into a reception area that screamed corporate power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city. Original artwork lined the walls, and the furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. Mr. Cross, a young woman in an expensive suit approached him. I'm Patricia Williams, Miss Sterling's assistant. Thank you for coming so quickly. Where is she? Conference room B. This way, please. Patricia led him down a hallway lined with photographs of Edward Sterling, shaking hands with presidents, prime ministers, and other titans of industry. At the end of the hall, she stopped before a set of double doors. She's been in there for about an hour, Patricia said quietly. Won't respond to anyone except to ask for you. Her father doesn't know about this yet, but if she doesn't come out soon... I understand. Daniel took a deep breath and knocked gently on the door. Cassandra, it's Daniel. Marcus called me. There was a long moment of silence, then the sound of footsteps. The door opened, and Cassandra Sterling stood before him, looking nothing like the polished heiress from the career fair announcement. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared from crying, her expensive blouse wrinkled. But it was her eyes that broke Daniel's heart. They looked hollow, defeated, like someone who'd given up on everything that mattered. "You came," she whispered. "Of course I came. Are you okay?" Cassandra laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Am I okay? I'm having a breakdown in my father's conference room because a college student asked me to explain how firing people serves the community. So no, Daniel, I'm not okay." She stepped aside to let him enter the conference room, and Daniel saw Marcus sitting at the far end of a table that could have seated 30 people. The young man looked nervous but determined, and Daniel began to suspect that whatever was happening here was more complicated than a simple emotional crisis. "Marcus says you're upset about the coffee shop," Daniel said carefully. "I'm upset about everything." Cassandra moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the city below. "Do you know what I spent the morning doing, reviewing termination packages for 43 employees who are losing their jobs because my family wants to build luxury condominiums? 43 people who will have to find new work, new ways to support their families, because we decided their livelihoods were less important than our profit margins." She turned back to face Daniel, tears streaming down her cheeks. "And the worst part is, I could stop it. I have enough voting shares to block the acquisition. But I won't, because I'm too much of a coward to stand up to my father." "Cassandra." "No, let me finish." Her voice grew stronger, more determined. "For 3 months, I pretended to be someone brave enough to work for her own money, someone strong enough to stand up to bullies, someone worthy of being protected by a man like you. But it was all pretense. The real me is standing here in a designer suit, calculating the cost of courage and deciding it's too expensive." Daniel looked between Cassandra and Marcus, pieces of understanding beginning to click together. "This isn't really about the coffee shop, is it?" Marcus shook his head. "It's about second chances. It's about not letting fear make decisions for people who care about each other. And it's about what happens when ordinary people decide they're not going to let powerful people control their lives anymore," added a new voice from the doorway. Daniel turned to see Allison entering the conference room, followed by Patricia and a man with a video camera. "Allison, what the hell are you doing here?" "Saving your relationship," his daughter replied matter-of-factly, "and creating a situation where Mr. Sterling can't retaliate against you without destroying his own reputation." Before Daniel could respond, Cassandra stepped forward. "I don't understand. Who are these people?" "I'm Allison Cross," Allison said, extending her hand with the kind of confidence that reminded Daniel powerfully of his late wife. "Daniel's daughter. And this is Tom Martinez from the university newspaper. We're here to offer you a choice." "What kind of choice?" Allison gestured toward the camera. "You can go on record right now on video explaining why you're blocking the coffee shop acquisition and establishing a new Sterling Industries policy that prioritizes community preservation over pure profit. Or you can let 43 people lose their jobs while everyone who matters knows you could have prevented it." Cassandra stared at the camera, then at Daniel, then at the group of young people who were essentially offering to start a war with one of the most powerful men in America. "You don't understand what you're asking," she said quietly. "My father will destroy all of you for this." "Will he?" Allison asked. "Because once this video goes public, any retaliation against the coffee shop employees, my father, or anyone else connected to this story will look like exactly what it is, a billionaire punishing people for embarrassing him. How do you think that'll play in the media? How do you think Sterling Industries shareholders will react to that kind of publicity?" Daniel watched his daughter with a mixture of pride and terror. She'd inherited his tactical thinking and her mother's courage, but she was also 18 years old and going up against forces that could crush her without a second thought. "Allison, this is too dangerous. These people have resources you can't imagine. And we have something they don't, Allison replied. We have the truth, and we have each other. She turned back to Cassandra. But none of it works unless you're willing to fight for what you want. Are you? For a long moment, the conference room was silent, except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sounds of city traffic 40 floors below. Cassandra stood at the center of it all, looking fragile and powerful, at the same time the weight of her decision visible in every line of her body. If I do this, she said finally, there's no going back. My father will disown me. I'll lose my position in the company, probably my trust fund, definitely my place in society. But you'll keep your soul, Marcus said quietly. And maybe that's worth more than money. Cassandra looked at Daniel, then her green eyes searching his face for something, permission maybe, or absolution, or just the assurance that she wasn't about to sacrifice everything for nothing. What do you think I should do? She asked. Daniel considered the question carefully, weighing everything he'd learned about courage and sacrifice and the price of standing up for what mattered. I think, he said slowly, that you should do whatever lets you look at yourself in the mirror tomorrow morning. But I also think you should know that whatever you decide, it doesn't change how I feel about you. How do you feel about me? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with 3 months of history and the weight of an impossible situation. I love you, Daniel said simply. I love Sophia Lane, and I love Cassandra Sterling, because they're both you. I love your intelligence and your kindness and your terrible habit of biting your lip when you're thinking. I love the way you light up when you talk about books and the way you worry about people you barely know. He stepped closer to her, close enough to see the gold flecks in her green eyes. But mostly, I love the person you become when you stop worrying about what everyone else expects and start thinking about what you want. And right now, you get to choose who that person is. Cassandra closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. When she opened them again, something had changed. The uncertainty was gone, replaced by a determination that reminded Daniel of the woman who'd stood up to college bullies and worried about coffee shop employees. Tom, she said, addressing the young man with the camera. Are you recording? Yes, ma'am. Cassandra straightened her shoulders, smoothed her hair, and faced the camera with the poise of someone who'd been trained to handle media from childhood. My name is Cassandra Sterling, and I'm here to announce that Sterling Industries will not be proceeding with the planned acquisition of 5th Street properties. Instead, we'll be establishing the Sterling Community Preservation Initiative, designed to protect local businesses that serve essential functions in their neighborhoods. She paused, looking directly into the camera lens. The coffee shop that started this conversation will remain open under new management, a cooperative owned by its employees. Sterling Industries will provide low-interest loans to help them purchase the property and expand their operations. We'll also be establishing a fund to support other small businesses facing displacement due to corporate development. Behind the camera, Daniel could see Tom's eyes widening as he realized he was documenting what would probably be front-page news by tomorrow morning. Furthermore, Cassandra continued, I'm announcing my resignation from Sterling Industries' board of directors, effective immediately. I'll be using my personal resources to establish an independent foundation focused on community development and worker protection. She looked directly at Daniel, then her voice softening slightly. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is step away from the life people expect you to live and start building the life you actually want. Today, that's what I'm choosing to do. The camera continued rolling for another few minutes, as Cassandra provided details about the new initiatives, but Daniel barely heard the specifics. He was too focused on the transformation he was witnessing. The Sterling heiress disappearing entirely, replaced by someone who looked like she'd finally found her way home. When Tom finally stopped recording, the conference room fell silent again. "Well," Patricia said finally, "this should be interesting. Your father is going to be furious," Cassandra finished. "But that's his choice to make, just like this was mine." She turned to Daniel, suddenly looking uncertain again. "I know this doesn't fix everything between us. I know I hurt you by lying, and I know the gap between our worlds is still enormous. But I needed you to know that you were worth fighting for, even if it's too late." Daniel stepped toward her, reaching out to take her hands. "It's not too late, Cassandra. It's never too late to choose love over fear. Even when love means giving up everything you've ever known. Especially then." What happened next would become the subject of countless news articles, social media posts, and business school case studies. But in that moment, in that conference room 40 floors above the city, it was just two people who'd found each other against impossible odds, finally choosing to fight for what they'd built together. The kiss they shared was witnessed by 5 young people who'd orchestrated a corporate revolution, and it tasted like coffee and courage, and the promise of a future neither of them had dared to imagine. 6 months later, the Sterling Community Preservation Initiative had saved 17 small businesses from closure and created over 200 jobs. The coffee shop on 5th Street had become a model for employee-owned cooperatives, and Marcus Chen had been featured on the cover of Entrepreneur magazine. Edward Sterling had indeed disowned his daughter, just as she'd predicted. But the media attention surrounding her decision had made him a symbol of corporate greed, while Cassandra became a symbol of principled resistance to unchecked capitalism. His attempts at retaliation were quickly abandoned when they only generated more negative publicity. Daniel Cross had been promoted to head of campus security, a position that came with a salary increase that made his life considerably more comfortable. He'd also become something of a local celebrity, the working-class hero who'd inspired a billionaire heiress to give up her fortune for love. And Allison Cross had changed her major from pre-med to journalism, inspired by her success at orchestrating what the New York Times had called the most romantic corporate revolution in American history. But the real story wasn't in the headlines or the business journals or the foundation reports. The real story was in the small moments that followed Daniel teaching Cassandra to change a tire in the parking lot of their apartment building. Cassandra helping Allison with college applications, providing the kind of mentorship that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with understanding what it meant to forge your own path. It was in the way Marcus saved them a corner table at the coffee shop every Tuesday evening, understanding that some traditions were worth preserving. It was in the charity bracelet Cassandra wore every day, a simple silver chain with a charm that read, "Courage," a gift from Daniel on the 6-month anniversary of their first honest conversation. Most of all, it was in the way they'd learned that love wasn't about choosing someone who fit into your existing life, but about being willing to build a new life together, one brave decision at a time. On a Tuesday evening in spring, as the sun set over the city and cast golden light through the coffee shop windows, Daniel Cross and Cassandra Sterling sat at their corner table reading different books, but sharing the same comfortable silence they'd discovered months ago. They were no longer the people they'd been when they'd first met, not the lonely security guard, or the isolated heiress, or even the college student with a secret. They were something new, something they'd created together through honest conversation and mutual courage and the radical decision to value love more than safety. And if anyone had asked them whether it had been worth it, the public scrutiny, the family estrangement, the financial uncertainty, they would have pointed to the way Cassandra still lit up when Daniel walked into a room, and the way Daniel still counted her like she was the most important person in the world. Some stories, they would have said, are worth any price you have to pay to live them. Outside the coffee shop, life continued its normal rhythm. Students hurried to evening classes, cars navigated the familiar streets, and somewhere in the distance, the city hummed with the dreams and struggles of millions of people trying to make their own way in the world. But inside, at a corner table under warm lights, two people who'd found each other against impossible odds were proof that sometimes, if you're brave enough to fight for it, love really can conquer all. Even when all includes billion-dollar corporations, family expectations, and the weight of two completely different worlds, especially then.